go. Okay, so the Parsha says, we start with the Meraglim, and it says, Efes ki ha'am ha'yoshev ba'aretz, they talk about, right now, just details. And they talk about who lives there. And the Meraglim continue and say there's these Bnei Anak, there's these huge giants, and the Hittites and Yebusites and Amorites inhabit the hill country. Canaanites dwell by the sea along the Jordan. And immediately, Kalev sees where this is going. He sees where this is going, where they said, yeah, it's a really great land, but here's what we see. And Kalev sort of sees that the conversation is going in a direction he's not so comfortable with, where they look like they're going to be negative about the land. So he jumps in and interrupts. And he hushed the people before Moses and said, let us by all means go up. We shall gain possession of it. We shall surely overcome it. We can take care of it. Don't worry. What did the spies, the other 10 spies, respond? They jump on to what Kalev is saying and say, it's not true. We can't do it. The people are too strong. They're much stronger than we are. Vayotziu, and here's the key pasuk I want to focus on. Vayotziu dibat ha'aretz asher taruta. And this is a cool word, calumnies, means negative things. They spoke negatively about the land, dibat ha'aretz asher taruta, that they had gone through, they had scouted. Lemor, ha'aretz asher avarnu ba laturata, Eretz ochelet yoshvei. I have it here bolded. If you can see that, it's a land that eats its inhabitants. It's a land, so it's a really, what started up here as a factual report, once Kalev jumps in and tries to make sure he spins it in this positive way, they now make it a very clearly negative report. We can't do it. We can't go up. The land, the people are strong. And then they start talking they talk about V'yotziu dibat ha'aretz, about the land, and they say Eretz ochelet yoshvei, it's a land that it eats its inhabitants. And then we have these things, and the next chapter starts, Vatisah kol adam vayitzdu et kolam vayivku et ha'am b'laylahu, that the people start to cry. And they wept that night. The people are, disheartened, and then we know the rest of the story. So if you would take a step back and you would ask, just see if I can see everyone here. If you would ask, who's the villain? Who are the villains in the story? It's very clear from this part of the text that the villains are these 10 spies, right? They're the bad guys. They were sent to present the scout of the land. They came back and they gave this scouting report that we can't do it, and led to all of the things that we've heard bad about the Meraglim. And indeed, the Meraglim were severely, severely punished. Okay. Now, let's contrast that, because one of the cool things about the 5 books of the Torah is that many of the stories in the earlier books of the Torah get repeated. And it's always very interesting to make a comparison between the previous stories, as they're talked about in the first 4 books, and the repetition of the story as Moshe repeats it in Sefer Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy. So I unfortunately only have this in Hebrew, but I'll translate. This story is repeated in the book of Deuteronomy, in Sefer Devarim. This story, again, just to recap what we've said so far, is that we've highlighted words that talk about how terrible the land is. It's a land that eats its inhabitants, dibat ha'aretz, and the villain in chief, the chief bad guy, so to speak, are these Meraglim. Now, it's known as the Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies. Let's see how this story is recounted when it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu telling the story again in the book of Deuteronomy. Pasuk Vav. V'tikravun elai kulchem v'tomru l'nishtachal lefaneinu v'yachperu lanu et haaretz v'yeshivu otanu davar et haderech asher na'aleh et haaretz. Right? You came to me, says Moshe, and you told me you wanted us to send spies. Skip for Pasuk Gimel. I said, sounds good. I took 12 people, Each echad l'shevet, one per tribe. Vayifnu vayalu ahara. They went nachal eshkol v'raglu ota. They went and they did the spying they needed to do. Vayikchu bi'adam mipi haaretz v'yoridu aleinu. And they took the fruits of the land and they brought it to us. And so, wow, what are we expecting the next verse to say? And they told us about how terrible it is and how we can't do it. Look what it actually says, Pasuk Chafei. Vayoridu aleinu, and they came, brought back us their fruits from the land. Vayashivu otanu davar, and they responded to us. They said to us, Vayomru tova haaretz asher Hashem Elokeinu noten lanu. The spies reported that the land is good, and the land that God gives us is good. Now, I look at this and I say, what story are you telling, Moses? Right? The story as it's recounted in the book of Deuteronomy sounds very different from the story that we just read, where they talked Dibat Eretz, Eretz Ochel Yoshveh, they talked about this terrible land. It seems very strange. It seems really strange that the story as it's recounted is not the way we remember it when we read it in Parshat Shlach. What does Moshe then say? Moshe then says, they said it was a good land, but you guys decided you want to go. And you rebelled against the word of God. And you started saying about how terrible things are and how much God hates you to send you here and God's going to destroy you. You sort of piggybacked on the negative things that they said, and the rest is history. So we're stuck with a really deep quandary, really serious question, which is that the story in our Parsha and the story in the book of Deuteronomy and Sefer Dvarim seem like a very different story, especially or specifically when it comes to what I say again, who's the villain? Who's the villain? Who's the bad guy? According to, if you would just read the book of Bamidbar, or read this week's Parsha, I would very clearly know that the villains are the spies. You read the story as it's read in Dvarim over here, I don't see the spies being denigrated or said anything bad at all. Doesn't describe them committing any crime whatsoever. So what exactly is going on? And in order to try to understand what the sort of answer to this is, where I want to actually move in to our topic, which is to try and understand, we'll talk a little bit about the power of words, but more importantly, the power of mindset, the power of attitude. And in order to do that, I want to quote from a tshuva, a responsa from the Maharam Mintz. Maharam Mintz. Now, just as we try to, when we talk about people, we quote sources, and we talk a little bit about who these people are. So this is there's the Rabbi Moshe Levi Mintz, and I'll get to you here my notes here a little bit on his biography. There was two Maharam Mintz. There was two Rabbi Moshe Levi Mintz. The first one that we're going to be talking about lived in the 15th century. He lived at about 1415. He was a contemporary and a teacher for many of the leading scholars of the generation. What was fascinating was he wrote many books of halacha, and he was the teacher, and he was often, but he's not often quoted in the main sources that were in the later half, the 1450s and 1500 early sources, like the Shulchan Aruch, even though he was a contemporary, because his work wasn't found and published until 1617. So that was well after the Shulchan Aruch was written. So he's not quoted as often, but he was a contemporary of many of these great teachers. And he deals with the following question, which I think is very apropos to our time, especially as we see a later tshuva. The question was asked to him. All right, so keep the whole question about the Meraglim in the back of your mind. We'll try and get to it. And in order to get to it, we're going to study our topic du jour, topic of the day. And the question was asked to him the following way. Masha Sha'alta, you asked, he responds to the questioner. Im matirim haneder mi shenadar be'et tzara lelech le'eretz Yisrael. There was a person who was in an eit tzara, a time of existential difficulty. And he, in that time of existential difficulty, made a neder, made an oath, that essentially, if God, you spare me from this, if you take care of this, I will go to Eretz Yisrael. Now, what was this? What was the terrible situation that occurred? So, several hundred years later, and I don't have the reference, but I have the tshuva. Several hundred years later, it was clear what the circumstance of difficulty that is described. So basically, again, somebody was in a terribly difficult situation, and they prayed for help, and they promised to God, they made a neder that if they get saved from this terrible situation, they're going to go to Eretz Yisrael. Now, what was the terrible situation? So in one of the footnotes that quotes this, they mention the situation was a cholera epidemic, where there was a terrible epidemic that was afflicting the town where this person was. And it's interesting because there was, he was in, his works were printed in Krakow, but part of when he spent time was in Posen. And one of the great rabbis of Posen was Rabbi Akiva Eger. So Rabbi Akiva Eger has a tshuva, a story that happens, and you're going to really be interested in some what's going on. And in the footnotes of the Maramins, they said that this same issue was the issue that scared the person who wrote the tshuva. So we've gone a little bit of a zigzag, so let me just, again, recap what we've done. We have started with a question, right? We started with the question, how is there this big discrepancy between what happens in the story of the Meraglim and what happens in the repetition of the story of the Meraglim? One, where we read it, sounds like the Meraglim are the villains. In the story in Dvarim, it sounds like the Meraglim didn't do anything wrong. In order to answer that, we're trying to understand a little bit about the power of words and the power of attitude through the tshuva of, so we put that in our back pocket. Now we're going to look at the tshuva of Bahram Mintz, one, a 15th century scholar, and where he talks about somebody who was really scared about some terrible issue, and he wanted to made a promise to God that he would move to Israel or go to Israel if this was resolved. So now, what was the issue? So the issue was the following. There was a cholera epidemic in his town, and the community was being decimated. And they had a question if they should go to shul, and should they daven in shul. And listen to what this is said in the Rabbi Akiva Eger, which is hundreds of years later, but it seems like it was the parallel situation. Michtavo again, I got a letter, B'inyan tefillah b'beit hakneset, regarding prayer in shul. Lidati, in my opinion, ze'emet she'akibutz b'makom tsar eino nachon, that to gather in a narrow place is not correctly because you don't have social distancing. Aval afshar litpalel kitot kitot. What you can do is daven in smaller individual groups. Ubechol pam mitei ma'at, each time with a smaller, a smaller unit. Erech tetvad barashim, for example, maybe 15 people, so that you can do social distancing and have multiple services. V'yatchilu ke'or haboker, you start first thing in the morning. V'acharav karacheret, and afterwards there will be another group. V'yem yuchad lanashim elu. You only have cohorts who daven with each other together. It's just interesting. This is written hundreds of years ago, and it seems parallel to the Los Angeles County Public Health Order. Do that at mincha as well. And you should also say pitum ektoret or mizmorim to daven to Hashem. So there was, and let me just see if here. Here, I gotta find where it talks about this. Here. You should have a police guard, a security guard, who makes sure when you have all the people who've pre-registered, you shouldn't let anybody else come in. And there, this is the way to say that this is the way I tell you that you should the way you should act. And here, what's this talk about? Michtav b'inyan megefa cholera. Rahman al-Itzlan, the terrible epidemic of cholera that's going on. The man yedu how they should appropriately act in these difficult times. So this is from Rabbi Akiva Eiger. This is hundreds of years ago, where they were making the same recommendations about davening and social distancing that we're seeing now with people coming to shul. But, so I just thought that was just really interesting. But the reason it connects to us, what we're talking about is that this seems to be, so there was a cholera epidemic, and there was one person who was in the midst of this epidemic and was was very, very concerned, was very, very scared. And he, in that context, he made a neder to Hashem that he should only, if he survives and his family survives this epidemic, they'll go to Eretz Yisrael. So what happened? They survived, and now the guy regrets it. Now he feels bad. He feels like, I don't know, did I make the right decision? I don't know, that should I move to Eretz Yisrael? So he wants to do a hatarat nedarim. He wants to annul the vow to be able to stay living in his town. So the Maharam suggests, he says, this is two questions. First of all, anybody who wants to leave from the tameh, the impure land to the pure land, is that the same as any kind of neder? Is that a revocable oath, right? Is that in general, irrelevant to the circumstance, a revocable oath?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I wrote you a note.
Oh, okay. Let's see if I can see it here. Here we go, chat. Yes, there was cholera in Yerushalayim. Yes.
But the thing is, it isn't spread from person to person.
Right. But they didn't know. Yeah, that's
know.
a great point. Yeah. Okay. So and the second question he asked was mishum dahave be'etzara. Right. The fact is, could you make the following argument when you make an oath? I only took that oath because I was beside myself with fear. Now that I've come to my senses, so to speak, that was an extraordinary circumstances, and I shouldn't be obligated to actually follow my promise. And so he says, this isn't a special issue. It's two exacerbating factors. Number one, that it was time of difficulty. Number two, that it's Eretz Yisrael specifically. And he comes to the conclusion that actually the person is able to revoke his oath. But here is why, and this is what I wanted to spend time on. He said, somebody who promised to go to Israel and then regrets it. I think it's okay to annul that vow. There's other people who agree with me. Because at that time, you're talking in the 1400s, it's very, very dangerous to go to Eretz Yisrael. Okay. He says, you have to, let's be objective about this issue. The bisman has a nowadays nishtabshu hadrachim. The roads have been ruined. Itabe kimat sakana gufamamon, right? That there are dangers to your body and your what is it, blood and treasure, your body and your money. Yesham tadir sakana tuva. Nebuch, when people that time would go to Eretz Yisrael, it was very dangerous, and many people didn't survive the journey. There, somebody who won't have a parnasa there. Kashali shifazer below kibbutz veherveach v'kafatz mi yado militein tzedakah. It's going to be, it's going to be a dangerous thing for, whether or not you're going to be obligated to or rely on tzedakah. But here's where I wanted to focus. Shesha'alta lehodiacha ikar hamitzvah holech l'Eretz Yisrael. It's a beautiful thing, a wonderful thing to go to Eretz Yisrael. And here's where he says, you have to be careful though. You got to follow all of the mitzvah that are true in the Eretz. And here's the key. He says, you got to be careful because Eretz Yisrael is an Eretz ochelet yoshveha. Eretz Yisrael is a land that eats its inhabitants. Now I'm very confused, right? We started all the way up here with a story of the spies. And what was the spies' chief sin? That they called the land of Israel a land who eats its inhabitants. That was their sin. We wondered about the fact that that was left out of Moshe's repetition. But the chief sin of the Baraklim is they denigrated the land of Israel. And here you have in 1417 someone writing and talking about how wonderful it is to go to the land of Israel and describing it as an Eretz Ochelet Yoshveh, a land that a land Ochelet Yoshveh that is it eats its inhabitants. I don't understand. Is the Maharam Mintz, this great sage, denigrating the land of Israel? Is he doing the same sin as the spies? So much so that he's saying it's okay to annul your vow whether or not you promised to go to Eretz Yisrael. So we're really, really confused. And what I want to try and do is bring all of the points we've said so far into one coherent point, which is that the concept of going to Eretz Yisrael, one who goes to Israel, is that Eretz Yisrael is this place of great kedusha. And if you go to Israel, you have the wonderful zechut, right? Mochalin mugal avonotav. That you can have all of your sins, be forgiven. Why? Because your mitzvot in Eretz Yisrael have just so much more power because you have that closeness to God. But says the Maharam Mintz, but your averot in Eretz Yisrael are also more dangerous. So look what he writes here. V'hizaher mikol minei avon. Be careful from all types of sins. L'kayem kol mitzvot hanogim ba'aretz. Follow all the laws. Shim yachti be'eretz Yisrael ye'anesh yoter mimash yehechote b'chutz la'aretz. Because if you sin in Israel, you're liable for a greater punishment than if you would sin in chutz la'aretz. Wow. And he says that behind it, that's what it means, Eretz Ochelet Yoshveh. It's a land that eats its inhabitants. Meaning that you got to be on your best behavior there. You got to be in your best behavior. And that's what he writes. Right nowadays, at the time of the 1400s, the land of Israel was in ruins. If you're going to go to Israel to be a letz, so to speak, if you're going to go to Israel to be a charlatan or a non-productive member of society, God says, who's asking that of you? because it's like the palace of the king, and it's more dangerous. That's what they say. You can always joke around, but if you joke around in a court, that's contempt of court, and you can have the same punish. You would never be punished for just yawning and making a face in the street. If you go into a courtroom and yawn and make a face, you could be fined or sanctioned because of contempt of court. So that's the idea of Eretz Ochel Yoshveha. So the Maharam Mintz is teaching us that what's going on. What does it mean that the land is? It's not a denigration of the land, but rather it's a description of the higher plane that life in Eretz Yisrael is about. And by the way, take a look at if I have it here. All right, let me see. I'll have it here. The Ramban. Let me just get it for you here. Let's see here. The Ramban. The Ramban, in his commentary on Bereshit, he says, "V'da ki mishpat Sodom haya l'ma'alat Eretz Yisrael." You ever wondered why the people of Sodom got such a terrible punishment? And it's not 100. I mean, we have lots of midrashim exactly what they did. Why was their entire city destroyed? Says the Ramban, "V'da ki mishpat Sodom." The judgment of Sodom haya l'ma'alat Eretz Yisrael was because Eretz Yisrael was so holy. Ki michlal nachalat Hashem. And there, it's the palace of the king. Ve'ena sovelet anshe to'evot. So people who act in a despicable and abominable ways are subject to more scrutiny and more punishment in Eretz Yisrael. V'kasher takieh tagoy kulo mepnei tovetam. And by the way, that's what Hashem says when he talks about the going to land to Israel. Don't behave in these negative ways. Shema takihar, like the land will spit you out. Hikdima v'ka'atam. So this land, so to speak, God's special focus on the land is going to kick the people of Sodom. That they were blasphemous to God and evil to their fellow man. And had that happened elsewhere, maybe it wouldn't have had the entire city being destroyed by ash and fire and brimstone. But in Eretz Yisrael, that is more likely because your mitzvot of greater import and your averot have greater import. The rule of tsarat. The rule of tsarat is the leprosy or the skin condition that happens. It can happen on your body, but it also can happen on your house, and it's associated with through Chazal as a punishment for lashon hara. But interestingly, the rules of tsarat of the house can only occur in Eretz Yisrael. There's no such thing as tsarat elsewhere. The tsarat can only happen in Eretz Yisrael, but lashon hara seems like it's an avera everywhere. Why is lashon hara in Chutz La'aretz not going to get to you to have your house affected, but in Eretz Yisrael it will? And the Ramban says that same thing. That in Eretz Yisrael there's this extreme reaction to averot, and therefore that's what it means that you only have tsarat in the house when the house is in Eretz Yisrael. So the idea that comes out of all of this is that the Eretz Yisrael is a very, very special and unique land. And now let's go back and see what the Meraglim say. The Meraglim say facts, right? They talk about facts that there's these big lands, there's these big lands. And then what do they say? They say, Vayas Kaleh Ve'omer Lalon Ala, we can do it. And Hashem Asher Eluito, and the Meraglim say, Lo nuchal lalot el ha'am ki chazaku, meaning we can't do it. And so, yes, they call it Eretz Ochel Yoshveha, but if you think about it, and this is the perspective of what goes on in Dvarim, the Meraglim, according to this approach, their chief sin was not denigrating the land, it was denigrating the people. They looked at the Jews who had complained at every turn, who had worshipped the golden calf, and they said, with sinners like you guys, will be devoured immediately. They had no confidence in themselves and in their brethren. And that's what happened. And you look in, so was their description of the land factual? Yes, it was factual. Their description, they brought back the fruits, they described the people, they even described it as an Eretz Ochelet Yoshveha, which, as we saw, just means that, again, in their context it was negative, but it could be interpreted just like the Maharam Mintz did over here. It means you got to be careful. You got to be at a high standard to live there, to be there. And so what the Meraglim were doing was they were denigrating the people. They were saying, this land is too good for you guys, or for us. Lo nuchal, we can't do it. So Moshe was right in Sefer Dvarim, right? The Meraglim did indeed say that the land was great. It was just the people who weren't great. And because the people weren't great, therefore, that was, they felt that they could never do it. And the sin in that regard was a sin of the lack of self-confidence, a sin of lack of seeing what you are and who you could be. Now let's just analyze that a little bit more. Their sin is a common one, right? They looked at the people where they were now, right? And they looked and they realized that people complained about the mud. They complained about this. They've gotten on God's last nerve, so to speak. And in that regard, they are could be looked at as, people who are still dirty from the filth of Mitzrayim. And they could look at them and say, yeah, I don't think you can make it. I don't think you can achieve anything. They looked at the people where they were and not where that potential allowed them to be, right? Just think about a child. You tell a child, you can't do this, you can't achieve this, you're not good enough, you can't do it. What's going to happen with that child? Or not even just a child, a person. When they're told constantly about the fact that the things they cannot achieve, the things they cannot do, it often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's what happens if you look at what Moshe says. That's exactly what happened. That we can't do it, and God hates us, and we're going to die. They made our hearts, weak and malleable, as they say, gekvetched. Le'moram gadol v'ram, it's going to be too hard. We're not going to be able to achieve it. Eretz ochel yoshveh, we're not going to be spiritually capable of sustaining ourselves. But what the Meraglim did is said, I am ignoring your potential. You may be, I see you as the filthy, downtrodden, people who, were just, still in that mentality of slaves for hundreds of years, not as the great and glorious Jewish people who received the Torah and could change the world's history. And the approach to the people in that regard ends up destroying their self-confidence, their feeling of their abilities, and then leads them to that negative future. So what Maharam Mintz was saying is correct. He's saying, listen, if you plan to go to Eretz Yisrael and act and waste your time and act against God and do all of those things that you see, by the way, happened throughout the Nevi'im Rishonim in Tanakh, right? Happened through Tanakh of this judge judging them, and then they sin, and the punishment is fast, furious, and swift. And then you go later to the books of Melachim, and you go to the exile of huge parts of the Jewish people, and then at the end of the book of Melachim of Nebuchadnezzar and Sancheriv, and earlier, and you have all of these things. It comes true. that it's an Eretz Ochel Yoshveh in that the land has high standards. But what the core point that we think of the Meraglim is what the Meraglim says, you can't achieve high standards. And that, I think, is a very, very powerful lesson. So the Maharam was saying is, make sure that you can achieve those high standards, as otherwise it's an Eretz Ochel Yoshveh, it's going to swallow you up. The Maharam was saying, if you can achieve those high standards, Gesundheit, hey, go and make sure that you, realize the great honor and zechut that you have to be in Eretz Yisrael, as it says, Mochalinu l'kol abonotav. It's a great and wonderful thing. But the sin of the Meraglim was that sin of the internal attitude. The really interesting parallel to this is the story of Eliyahu Hanavi, right? In the story of Eliyahu Hanavi, he is running away in Melachim Aleph, chapter 19. He's running away from Izebel. Izebel is this evil, evil queen who's married to Achav, who is an evil king, and he gets stuck in the fact that his whole MO, right, his whole raison d'etre was to bring the Jewish people back to the service of God after Izebel and Achav had taken them away from the service of God. And he has this incredible showdown on Har HaKarmel, on the Mount Carmel, where he's able to, show the glory of God and disprove all of the charlatans worshiping idols. But at the end of the day, he has to run for his life. And he turns to God and he says, Kano kineti l'Hashem. I don't understand. Why am I in such a terrible spot here that I, end up alone, destitute, running for my life, when all I tried to do was stand up for God's honor? And there's this very powerful scene where God shows him a great thunder and lightning and fire and brimstone and all these things, and it says Lo barash Hashem and Lo ba'esh Hashem. God's not there. And at the end of the day, he was fired. Eliyahu Hanavi was fired and was told to take Elisha. So look what the Mechilta says. The Mechilta, when the Midrashim there in Sefer Melachim says, Eliyahu tava kavod ha'av v'lo kavod haben. Eliyahu Hanavi, he spent all his time working to try and bolster God's honor, but he didn't focus on the greatness and the honor of the Jewish people. Shedemar kano kineti l'Hashem elokei tzvaot. I was zealous on behalf of God, and what did he do? He therefore brought and invited punishment on the Jewish people because they were sinning. But instead of fighting for the people, you ended up denigrating the people, and therefore Uman ne'emar sham. And so, what does it say there? V'yomer Hashem elav lech shuv l'darkecha midbar damesek ve'elisha ben shavat timshach le'nevi. That she'ein lomar Talmud lomar lenavi tachtecha ela shi'i efshi b'nevuotecha. God says, I can't deal with your leadership, your prophecy, because your prophecy talks all about my honor, but it doesn't talk about the potential of the Jewish people. And yes, they were sinning, but your approach should have been, let me help them, let me bring out their potential. And therefore, Eliyahu Hanavi gets fired, and Elisha is replaced with him in a Navi because of that same thing. That if you just focus on people's shortcomings, you never focus on begging for mercy on their behalf, says God, that's not the leadership I want from you. Even though the people were at the depths of idolatry, the leadership I want from you is to build up the people. Bring forth their potential. Bring forth the positivity. Bring forth what is great about the Jewish people, and that should be your focus. That should be your focus. And yes, Eretz Yisrael is a very, in a certain regard, dangerous land because Eretz Yisrael and your Avei Road are going to be really dangerous there. But that's the reason to go and to raise your standards and raise your potential and raise your ability because you are that great. You are that good. The message is a leader who is not positive about his people says, God, that's not the kind of leader I want. A leader who focuses on the people's shortcoming and says the people are bad and they've made this mistake and that mistake and therefore God get rid of them, that's not the kind of leadership. And that was the mistake of the Meraglim. That was, in a certain regard, differently the mistake of Eliyahu Hanavi. And interestingly, is differently than Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu, one where he had lots of complaints and he's very frustrated with the Jewish people, but at no point does he say, get rid of them. Whenever God says, I'm going to get rid of him, Moshe says, no, make sure you save them, because Moshe says, no, the people can do it. I'm going to look, as difficult as they are now, they have the potential to be great, and that's what I need to focus on. Interestingly, there was one pasuk in Mishlei that I always love to quote, that I probably heard from me other times. It says here, Al tochach leitz pen yisnaeka, hochach chacham v'ye'ehaveka. Right? So that's usually translated as, don't rebuke a charlatan because he'll hate you. But if you rebuke, if you give constructive criticism to somebody who is wise, then he'll love you. So I serve one more Rebbeim in Eretz. Rabbi Kalman Bear has a beautiful, I would say a twisting of this pasuk, but a very powerful idea. He says it like this. Let's just see here. It's really cool. Let's see if I can do it this way. This way. Let's see here. Watch this. The way he says, again, al tochach leitz, don't rebuke a charlatan, pen yisneka, because he'll hate you. Hochach chacham, rebuke, criticize a chacham because he'll realize that you're coming out of love and trying to help him, and he'll love you. Says Rabbi Bear, this is a different way of reading it. Al tochach, al tochach, don't rebuke somebody by saying, let's, you're a fool. Because what's the guy going to do? Pen yisna'eka. He's going to hate you. If you approach somebody and you try to reach them by calling them a fool and calling them a charlatan and calling them, focusing on all of their mistakes and all of the things that are bad about them and all of their shortcomings, you're never going to get anywhere. They're going to be defensive. They're going to hate you. What should you do? Hochach le chacham. You should rebuke that same person or criticize or help that person by looking at him and saying, look, I know you're a chacham. You're a person with great wisdom within you. And therefore, change your act in this way, do something a little bit different that way. Look at that person and see and project that you see within them the good. Then v'ye'ehaveka. Then they'll love you. Because they'll see that you're trying to build them, and they'll give you that. So again, it's definitely a rereading of the simple reading of the pasuk, but it's this same idea. The same idea. So the fellow in the cholera epidemic turns to Maram Mintz, and it was a side point. It was interesting that they did it with social distancing, etc. But he turns to Maram Mintz and he says, I was in this terrible time, and I prayed to God that if I get saved by the epidemic, I'll go to Eretz Yisrael. And Maram Mintz is telling him, just think long and hard about it, because you can do it, and you can do it. Be careful about Eretz Yisrael. But don't go there, linhog, as he says, don't go linhog ba kalut rosh, right? To act in in the manner of a let's. But if you can go there and you can build yourself up, absolutely, it's a wonderful thing. But again, the core principle of this halacha, the core principle of this idea is that the way we as leaders, or way as people are meant to approach each other is about looking and seeing the good. And if we don't, says God, you're like Eliyahu Hanavi, and you know what? That's not the way you look at the Jewish people. If you look at the Jewish people as a bunch of people with lots of mistakes and shortcomings, then you know what? That's not the kind of leadership God wants from you. Yes, it's true. They may be sinning. They may be in the depths of idolatry. They may have made all these complaints against God. They may have done all the things that are wrong. All that is true. But you as a leader, or you as a fellow member of the community, your job is not to try and undermine their status with God. Your job is to look at the community and say, how can I bring from within it the potential? How can I bring it from within it the best way to achieve success? So I think that's what I call the inspiration from the halakha. The inspiration from the halakha is that underlying all of this is the foundational principle of looking at people with a positive attitude, looking for the good in people, looking for seeing the Jewish people for the amazing potential of what they can achieve, and even if they're not achieving it right now, for what their future can hold. And if you look at it that way, you can be a Moshe Rabbeinu. If you don't, you're a Meraglim, or in a certain different way, you're going to be like Eliyahu Hanavi, in that way that the Mechilta describes. And so I think that's a really powerful and frankly inspiring lesson that may explain to us the discrepancy between the Meraglim in Bamidbar and the Meraglim in Dvarim, but more importantly, reminds us of the approach that we have to each other, especially during a time of pandemic and time of difficulty, that the best way that we can achieve success is making sure that we see the success in others and hopefully have a chance to be able to bring that success out and that positive out in other people. Okay, so I wish everyone a wonderful, wonderful day. And everyone can, Miriam, I think you're unmuted. You can talk, and then anybody else can unmute themselves to ask questions. Go ahead, Miriam.
I think you gave us a wonderful lesson today of practicality.
Thank you.
Of everyday life. And we've heard it before, but it's so important that we could hear it. It's certainly worth repetition again and again. And to put it in very succinct words, how we say something is as important as what we have to say.
No question.
We have to think before we talk, and if we have rebuke, we must give it in a certain way which will not make that person immediately defensive, even defending his guilt because of the way we said it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so that is what we need to pay attention to in our everyday living. And for that, I say, Toda Rabba.
No problem. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yes, so Suzanne, I think you can unmute yourself. You should be able to unmute yourself.